In fact, we're going to stay with that story and give you some analysis on the reed dance ceremony, Umkhosi Womhlanga. Let's turn now to cultural expert, Professor Musa Xulu. Prof, good afternoon and thank you for joining us. Let's start with the decision to move the annual ceremony, Umkhosi Womhlanga, from its traditional venue, which is the Enyogeni Palace, to the new Emashobeni Palace. Does anything turn on that decision, or is it the King Musa Xulu, seeking to carve out his own way of doing things and a legacy for himself, even if it does mean that the newly built 140 million rand dome amphitheater structure at Enyogeni Palace is underutilized? Prof. Xulu, I don't know if you caught my question.
No, I didn't.
Sure.
I didn't catch your question. We seem to meet everywhere now these days, but can you repeat it?
Yeah, let me ask you the question again then, Prof. So at Enyogeni Royal Palace, which has been the traditional place where the Umkhosi Womhlanga would be taking place, there have been extensive works that have been done recently to the tune of some 140 million rand by the government of KwaZulu-Natal. But despite that, King Musa Xulu deciding that actually this year he's going to depart from that tradition and the ceremony would center around the new Emashobeni Palace. Does anything turn on that decision? Or are we seeing a king here who is seeking to stamp his own authority, carve his own way, and define his own legacy?
Well, a lot has been said, but I think on the issue of the finances that were spent at Enyogeni and the tradition of holding this reed dance ceremony at Enyogeni, I think there was a little bit of miscalculation there because it's public funds, and public funds have to be respected. To spend so much money, 152 million actually to be exact, on something and then it gets abandoned just like that, I think the king and his advisors were possibly not very well advised. On the issue of the tradition, from an anthropological point of view, traditions get established over a time, and 40 years is a time that holding that ceremony at Enyogeni would have established a tradition. You don't move things so easily. For example, the King Shaka memorial event is always done at Kwatugoza where he died. But of course, the king then has put forward his own reasons that he wants to establish his own legacy and so on. I don't know much about that because there's still a court case which is outstanding there in Bloemfontein, which may decide otherwise. So what do? We look at maybe he could have continued with Enyogeni until he is sure that in terms of the courts, he is permanently the Zulu king.
Let's turn to the substance of the ceremony itself, Umkhosi Womhlanga. To the undiscerning eye and perhaps to the outside observer, what strikes one is the colorful displays of tradition and dance and these energetic young maidens. But what is the substantive value in AmaZulu traditional life of Umkhosi Womhlanga?
Well, I like that question. Let me say, historically, in terms of cultural history, there is no evidence that Umkhosi Womhlanga ever existed before or after Shaka and so on. So it came in as an import, from a cultural import from the Eswatini, introduced by the late Queen Mantombi, the mother to the present king, in 1984. The King Zwelithini liked to ask his queens and wives to have something to do. And at that time, you must remember, in 1984 till maybe 2000 and something, there was a big problem of AIDS, HIV/AIDS in KZN. So they projected it as one of the ways in which to curb the spread of AIDS, HIV and AIDS among young maidens. And then the government started funding it as a result because it spoke to the objectives of government. But there was no cultural objective that was put forward. And therefore, The cultural value of it at the moment is that because of the way in which the maidens dress, there could be some very thriving cultural enterprises that are selling the beads and all of those things that the maidens are wearing when they go there. But it is not a ritualistic ceremony. There's only one ritualistic ceremony in KwaZulu, which is called Umkhosi Weshwama or Umkhosi Woswela, which happens late in December or early in January, which addresses the issues of food security and strengthens the organs of the kingdom through symbolically ensuring that the king goes through lots of strengthening by traditional healers so that, of course, he is able to stand, because when you're a king, you always have many enemies. And one of the great issues that become addressed there is the issue of males, young males. You remember the whole story about the killing of the bull by hand, which shows the power of the males.
Yeah.
That is the only one ceremony that touches the whole Zulu kingdom.
Yeah.
But of course, this one has come in handy to address the issues of maybe cultural displays, as you say, and also cultural economic.
So, Prof, now that you are there, let me go to that question about, is there something to be said for a concomitant insistence on instilling these values that you just talked about that are being instilled in young maidens, but also doing it with young men, the peers of these maidens, such that, because their youth is playing out side by side and they interact and relate in many ways. So the values we are seeking to instill in young maidens, what are the traditions that continue to be maintained, and to what extent do they continue to be maintained, that are seeking to instill the same values in young men as they come of age?
Well, the young men, of course, Zulus don't have any special circumcision or initiation ceremony since the days of Shaka. But when you look at the structure of and the hype around this ceremony we're having today, compared to the ceremony where young men are involved, I think there's much more expenditure on this one, but lesser expenditure on the Umkhosi Weshwama and the killing of the bull. And so there's an imbalance there. And sometimes you can see that young men in KwaZulu-Natal have generally become very violent, because they feel that they are being left out of any kind of empowerment, cultural empowerment, as a result of so much attention being paid only to maidens. There's also another issue related to this, that there was at some stage some kind of studies that, because then people started, the holders of the ceremony of the maidens started saying that they're aiming at reducing the rate of teenage pregnancy.
Yeah.
But the study showed that there's no correlation between this ceremony and the rate of teenage pregnancies, which are going up every year. So what should be the case? At some stage, some academics came up and said maybe the king should work on kind of researched objectives of what can be achieved in terms of reducing teenage pregnancies through this ceremony. But that has not happened up to now.
All right. Thank you for your insights this afternoon. That's Professor Musa Xulu, who is a cultural expert, weighing in as we continue to watch the Umkhosi Womhlanga, the traditional reed dance, playing itself out in Opongolo at Emashobeni Royal Palace.